The cemetery in Payu opened before dawn. No reporters waited at the iron gates. No bodyguards in black suits. No convoy of engines idling in manufactured respect. Only one car crossed the threshold. The man stepped out before the driver could move. The door closed softly behind him. The driver remained inside, hands on the wheel, eyes forward. Chairman Kong Dae-ho. Seoul knew his name even when it pretended not to. Construction permits moved through the city hall when he made a phone call. Prosecutors accepted early retirement when his assistant sent flowers. Banks restructured debt without asking questions. Yet here, among rows of identical gray stones, he wore no watch. No ring. No presidential cufflinks were gifted by men who owed him favors. Only a single white chrysanthemum in his hand. He walked the path without hesitation. No map needed. The route had burned itself into muscle memory over 3 winters. The headstone waited at the end of the 3rd row. Kong Min-jae. Born 6 years ago. Died 3 winters ago. The stone was clean. Too clean. Dae-ho stopped. His shoes pressed into gravel that had been recently raked. The grass around the base had been trimmed. The marble surface reflected the pale morning sky without a single streak of rain or dust. Someone had been here. Recently. He knelt slowly. His knees protested, but he ignored them. The chrysanthemum touched the stone, then rested against it. His hand withdrew. Then stopped. A paper windmill stood in the soil beside the grave. Cheap plastic. Faded blue. 4 uneven blades catching the early breeze. Not from the funeral. That had been white lilies and silence and business cards exchanged in muted tones. This was new. Dae-ho's breath caught in his throat. He had folded dozens of those windmills. Not in boardrooms. Not during negotiations that reshaped district boundaries. On a heated floor in Gangnam. In a rented apartment that smelled like soybean paste stew and laundry detergent. For a boy who sat cross-legged, spinning them between small fingers, waiting for a father who never came home on time. The windmill turned once. The blade caught light. Dae-ho stood too fast. The cemetery tilted. The rows of graves blurred into gray streaks. His vision narrowed to a single point of pressure behind his eyes. The ground rose to meet him. The most feared man in northern Seoul collapsed face first beside his son's grave. The chrysanthemum rolled away in the wind. When Dae-ho opened his eyes, he was not in a hospital. No antiseptic smell. No doctors whispering behind clipboards. No machines measure the reliability of his heartbeat. Just the leather interior of his car. The driver stared straight ahead. His knuckles were white on the wheel. "You didn't call anyone," Dae-ho said. "No, Chairman." "Good." The cemetery gate was closing in the rearview mirror. Morning traffic had started to thicken on the highway back toward Seoul. Dae-ho sat up slowly. His palm ached. Dirt clung to the creases. He brushed it away without looking. "How long?" he asked. "4 minutes, Chairman." Not long enough to matter. Not short enough to ignore. They crossed the Han River in silence. Seoul spread beneath them, glass towers reflecting clouds, construction cranes punctuating the skyline like exclamation marks on ambition. The city had been rewritten 100 times in the last 30 years. Neighborhoods erased. Highways carved through hillsides. Buildings that existed in memory only. Dae-ho had signed half of those changes into existence. The penthouse overlooked it all. Marble floors. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Furniture selected by someone paid to understand taste. Everything is designed to communicate control without saying a word. He stood at the window and loosened his tie. Below, the river moved without asking permission. His phone buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again. He powered it off. On his desk lay a single photograph. Old. Creased at the corners. Colors faded to the palette of cheap film and fluorescent apartment lighting. A woman sat cross-legged on a warm floor. Paper was scattered around her. Her hands mid-fold, captured in motion. A boy watched her closely. Tongue pressed between his teeth in concentration. His fingers mimicking hers. The woman's face had been cut out. Precise. Surgical. No ragged edges. That had been Daeho's doing. 3 years ago, in this same room, with scissors that cost more than the camera that took the photo. He had paid to forget her. Paid the right people. Signed the right documents. Ensured her name appeared nowhere that mattered. But he had never paid to forget the boy. The room was silent except for the hum of climate control. Daeho picked up the photograph. Turned it over. On the back, in handwriting he didn't recognize anymore, 6 words. I'll come back before you sleep. His own promise. His own hand. Written in a world that no longer existed. He set the photo down. Poured water from a crystal decanter. Drank without tasting it. The phone on his desk, landline, untraceable, rang once. He let it ring 3 times before answering. Chairman, the voice said. We have a situation. Daeho said nothing. The cemetery. The groundskeeper quit this morning. No notice. Phone disconnected. The funeral director's office was closed when we arrived. No forwarding information. And the CCTV? A pause. Corrupted, Chairman. The server room experienced a power failure last night. All footage from the last 72 hours is unrecoverable. Daeho set the glass down carefully. Too organized, he said. Yes, Chairman. Someone was controlling the silence. Someone who understood how these things worked. Someone who knew exactly which threads to pull. Daeho ended the call without another word. He returned to the window. The city continued below. Traffic. Construction. Deals are being made in restaurants where the prices aren't printed on menus. Somewhere in that sprawl, someone had stood at his son's grave. Someone had placed a cheap paper windmill in the soil. Someone knew. And Daeho, who had built an empire on knowing everything before anyone else did, realized he had been walking blind. At midnight, his most trusted fixer arrived. No knocking. The man had a key. More importantly, he had permission to use it at hours when most problems needed solving. He placed a manila folder on the desk without greeting. The death certificate, he said. Daeho opened it. The document looked official. Government seal. Attending physician's signature. Date of death stamped in red ink that had faded to rust over 3 years. Look at the second page, the fixer said. Daeho turned it over. Another certificate. Same child. Same date. Different conclusion. Status, missing. Presumed endangered. Case remains open. The fixer pointed to the date in the corner. This was filed first. 6 hours before the death certificate. The original attending physician, Dr. Yoon from Asen Medical Center, listed the child as missing from the emergency ward. Nobody recovered. No confirmation of death. Daeho's finger traced the timeline. The death certificate was added later, the fixer continued. 8 days after the initial report. Different physician signature. Dr. Lim. Except Athat San Medical has no record of a Dr. Lim employed during that period. Who authorized the change? The fixer hesitated. Then slid a third document across the desk. A form. Standard administrative closure. Used when cases needed to be resolved for bureaucratic efficiency. The signature at the bottom was confident. Practiced. Impossible to forge because it had been genuine. Kong Daeho. The room contracted. Daeho remembered the day. Not clearly. But enough. 3 years ago. A conference room in Gangnam. 30 documents are spread across a table. Land permits for a Songdo development. Tax reconciliation for shell companies in 3 countries. Closure forms for cases that were costing the city money to keep open. His assistant had marked each signature line with a yellow tab. He had signed them all in under 20 minutes. You approved the death, the fixer said quietly. The system didn't fail. It waited for your signature. Daeho set the document down. He had buried his son with a pen stroke. Filed him away between a construction variance and a corporate merger. Efficient. Clean. The way he handled everything. Who brought you this form? Daeho asked. That's the problem, Chairman. The request came through official channels. City Hall. Signed by someone in the medical examiner's office. But when I traced the authorization chain. The fixer pulled out his phone. Showed a scan of an internal routing slip. The request had originated from inside Daeho's own office. Someone on his payroll had placed this document in front of him. Someone had known he would sign it without reading. Someone had turned his efficiency into a weapon. Find out who processed this request, Daeho said. Already did, Chairman. The assistant who handled your paperwork that day resigned 2 weeks later. Moved to Busan. I checked her bank records. She received a one-time payment of 40 million won the day after you signed. From where? A maritime cooperative. Registered in Busan. Same month your son was declared dead. The fixer closed his folder. Someone paid to make the child disappear on paper, he said. And they used you to do it. Daeho stood. The city light stretched to the horizon. Millions of people are sleeping. Working. Living inside systems, they never questioned because the systems had always worked. He had designed those systems. And now someone had used his own design to erase his son from existence. Keep the investigation quiet, Daeho said. The fixer nodded and left. Daeho remained at the window. For the first time in 30 years, he didn't know what he was looking at. In Mapo, 12 steps led from a narrow apartment to the street. The woman counted them every morning. 12 steps. Then the pavement. Then the bus stops. Routine was safety. Deviation was a risk. She locked the door behind her. Double-checked the handle. The boy waited on the landing below, backpack already on his shoulders. Stay close, she said. He nodded. The boy wore a school uniform 2 sizes too large. Sleeves folded back. Hem hovering above scuffed sneakers that had been white once. His backpack sagged at the corners from carrying textbooks that were heavier than necessary. From the side pocket, a blue paper windmill jutted out at an angle. They descended together. The morning was cool. Delivery trucks rumbled past. A grandmother swept the entrance to a convenience store. A salaryman smoked outside a shuttered bar, still in yesterday's suit. Normal. Unremarkable. The woman pulled her scarf tighter and took the boy's hand. At the bus stop, a black sedan waited across the street. Tinted windows. Engine off. No parking lights. The woman did not look at it. She never looked. The boy glanced once. Then turned his attention to a cat threading between parked motorcycles. The bus arrived on schedule. They boarded. The woman paid with exact change. No transit card. No digital trail. The boy chose the window seat. He always did. As the bus pulled away, he turned the windmill once between his fingers. The plastic blade spun briefly, then stopped. Mom, he said softly. The woman's hand tightened on the pole. Not yet, she replied. The boy looked out the window. Buildings slid past. Construction sites. Coffee shops are opening for morning commuters. A city waking up to repeat yesterday's patterns. He watched it all without expression. At the next stop, an elderly man boarded. The boy stood immediately, offering his seat. The man smiled and sat down with a grateful nod. The boy moved to stand beside his mother. She adjusted his collar without looking at him. "You'll be late if the bus is slow," she said. "I'm never late," he replied. True. The boy had perfect attendance. Teachers wrote commendations. Other parents asked how she managed to raise such a responsible child. She never answered. The bus turned onto a wider street. Morning traffic thickened. Horns. Crosswalks. Uniformed students clustering at intersections. The woman checked her watch. 7:43. Right on schedule. The boy reached up and tugged her sleeve once. A signal. She followed his gaze. 2 cars back, in the adjacent lane, the black sedan. Still following. Still maintaining distance. The woman's expression didn't change. "Do you have your lunch?" she asked. The boy patted his backpack. "Yes." "Your homework?" "Yes." "Then you're ready." The bus stopped at the school gate. The boy stepped off with a dozen other students. He turned back once. His mother stood in the doorway of the bus, one hand on the rail. She didn't wave. He didn't expect her to. The bus pulled away. The boy adjusted his backpack and walked toward the school entrance. Behind him, the black sedan pulled to the curb. The boy didn't look back. He simply kept walking. Calm. Unhurried. A child who had learned long ago that being watched didn't mean being caught. 2 districts away, in a quiet room above a closed gymjilbang, 6 screens glowed in the darkness. A man sat forward in a rolling chair. Energy drink cans are stacked beside the keyboard. Cigarette smoke curled toward a ceiling fan that hadn't worked in months. Screen 1, cemetery footage from 4 days ago. Timestamp 5:47. A figure kneeling at a grave. Screen 2, traffic camera. Mapo intersection. A woman and a boy are boarding a bus. Screen 3, school perimeter. Students filtering through the gate. Screen 4, interior feed. Classroom hallway. The boy is removing his shoes at a cubby. Screen 5, satellite view. Routes highlighted in red. Patterns were analyzed over 6 weeks. Screen 6, financial transactions. Bank transfers. Shell accounts. Payments are moving through systems designed to avoid detection. The man zoomed in on screen 3. The boy stood at his cubby, windmill in hand. He placed it carefully inside, then closed the door. Routine. Expected. Then the boy turned. His eyes swept the hallway. Not frantically. Not with the confusion of a child trying to remember something. Deliberately. He looked directly at the camera mounted in the corner above the fire extinguisher. Paused. Then looked away. The man in the surveillance room leaned closer. He rewound the footage. Played it again. Frame by frame. The boy's eyes locked onto the lens. 1 second. Maybe less. But enough. The man reached for his phone. Speed dial. 1 ring. Yes. A voice answered. No greeting. No identification needed. The child is aware, the man said. Of the surveillance? Of everything. Silence on the other end. He looked directly into the camera, the man continued. Not by accident. He knew where it was. He wanted us to know he knew. Are you certain? The man pulled up another clip. Last week. Convenience store near the apartment. The boy was standing in the snack aisle, facing a security mirror. He had waved. Small. Brief. But unmistakable. This isn't an accident, the man said. The voice on the phone exhaled slowly. Update the file. Mark the child as a conscious participant. Adjust the risk assessment accordingly. And the woman? No change. She's protecting him. That much is consistent. Protecting him from what? The line went silent for 3 seconds. That's what we're paying you to find out. The call ended. The man set his phone down and returned to the screens. On screen 4, the boy sat in class. Posture perfect. Eyes on the teacher. Hand raised to answer a question. Ordinary. Unremarkable. Except for the fact that a 6-year-old child had identified multiple surveillance points across 2 districts without training, without help, without showing any fear. The man opened a new file on his computer. Subject, Kong Min Jae, alleged deceased, status, active. Observant. Potentially trained. Threat level, unknown. He saved the file. Then lit another cigarette and watched the boy who wasn't supposed to exist solve math problems in a classroom that didn't know his real name. Years earlier, before the towers and the headlines, Dae-ho had lived in a different soul. Not the soul of marble lobbies and private elevators. The soul of vinyl flooring and shared walls thin enough to hear neighbors arguing about money at 2 in the morning. A rented apartment in Sindang-dong. 3rd floor. No elevator. Heating that worked only when the landlord remembered to pay the gas bill. The woman had lived there first. He had arrived with a single bag and a job driving trucks for a construction company that paid in cash and asked no questions about background. She worked at a restaurant. Late shifts. Came home smelling like fryer oil and soy sauce. Counted tips on the heated floor while he pretended to sleep. They didn't talk much. Didn't need to. Survival was its own language. Then the boy arrived. Not planned. Not convenient. But undeniable. Dae-ho remembered the first night. The woman sitting cross-legged on the warm floor, folding paper cranes because she'd read somewhere that it calmed infants. The boy had watched her hands. Quiet. Focused. Dae-ho had knelt beside them. Show me, he'd said. She'd taught him to fold. Corners precise. Creases sharp. They'd made dozens. The boy had fallen asleep surrounded by paper birds. That's when Dae-ho had made the promise. Not planned. Not rehearsed. Just 3 words whispered while the boy's breathing evened out. I'll come back. Then 5 more. Before you sleep. Always. The woman hadn't said anything. She'd simply placed her hand over his. For 6 months, he'd kept it. Came home before dark. Played with the boy on the heated floor. Folded paper. Told stories that made no sense but made the boy laugh. Then the opportunity arrived. A meeting. Late night. Men in suits who knew men with money. A deal that required presence, not skill. Just showing up and keeping quiet. One night. I'll be back before he sleeps, Dae-ho had said. The woman had nodded. He'd left at sunset. He'd returned 3 days later. The apartment was the same. The boy was the same. But the promise had changed shape. It became, I'll be back this weekend. Then, I'll be back when this project finishes. Then, I'll send money. That's better than being here. The woman never complained. Never asked him to stay. She'd simply stopped waiting at the door. The boy had stopped asking when he'd come home. And Dae-ho had stopped noticing when he stopped promising. The meetings multiplied. The suits got more expensive. The men with money became men with power. He learned quickly how to listen without agreeing, how to suggest without committing, how to make himself necessary without becoming a threat. Within 2 years, he'd moved into management. Within 5, he'd bought his first building. Within 10, his name appeared in newspapers. The apartment in Sindangdong became a memory. Then a photograph. Then, something he paid people to never mention. The woman had disappeared somewhere in that timeline. Not dramatically. No final argument. No doors slammed in anger. She'd simply stopped being where he expected her to be. He'd looked. Briefly. Then decided it was better not to know. The boy had been 4 years old. Old enough to remember. Not old enough to understand why remembering hurt. Now, standing in his penthouse, Dae-ho realized the truth. The empire existed because the promise was broken. Every tower. Every contract. Every man who answered his calls with respect. Built on the night he chose not to come home. And the boy he'd promised to return to had been waiting ever since. Not for an apology. Not for money. For the end of the sentence that had never been finished. The file arrived at dawn. No courier. No signature required. It simply appeared on Dae-ho's desk while he'd been standing at the window watching the city wake up. He opened it. Inside, 6 years of financial records. Bank transfers. Automated. Consistent. The same amount is deposited on the first of every month into an account registered under the Busan Metropolitan Maritime Cooperative. 40 million won. Every month. For 72 consecutive months. The math was simple. Someone had spent nearly 3 billion won keeping something, or someone, alive and invisible. Dae-ho traced the payment route backward. The funds originated from an offshore account in Singapore. Routed through Hong Kong. Then Taipei. Then, finally, you went to South Korea through a credit union that specialized in the fishing industry payroll. Clean. Professional. The kind of laundering that requires infrastructure. The recipient account had been opened 6 years ago. 1 week after the boy was born. Activity was minimal. Withdrawals matched living expenses for 2 people in a modest Seoul neighborhood. Rent. Utilities. School fees. Groceries. No luxuries. No excess. Just survival. Dae-ho flipped to the next page. A property record. An apartment lease in Mapo. Registered under a name he didn't recognize. But the guarantor's signature was familiar. A lawyer. One of the mid-level fixers who handled paperwork for the organization. The kind of man who filed documents and forgot them immediately. Except this one he'd remembered. Because 3 years ago, that same lawyer had transferred to Busan. Early retirement. Generous severance. No forwarding address. Dae-ho picked up his phone. The fixer answered on the first ring. The lawyer who signed the Mapo lease, Dae-ho said. Is he still in Busan? No, Chairman. He left Korea 2 years ago. Singapore, according to immigration records. No return trips. And the Maritime Cooperative? Shell organization. Registered directors are all aliases. The actual ownership structure is buried under 8 layers of holding companies. All legal. All clean. Who benefits? That's the interesting part, Chairman. The cooperative's primary business is import-export. Specifically, shipping manifests between Busan and Qingdao. But the volumes don't match the revenue. They're moving something that isn't listed on customs declarations. Dae-ho set the file down. They're not hiding money, he said. They're hiding access. Yes, Chairman. Whoever controls this network can move people or information without triggering any flags. And they've been doing it for over a decade. Daeho turned to the window. Below, traffic crawled across the Hanam Bridge. Ordinary people going to ordinary jobs. Systems are functioning exactly as designed. But underneath, another system operated. Older. Quieter. And someone had used it to keep his son alive without his knowledge. The woman, Daeho said. She didn't run away. No, Chairman. She was relocated. Voluntarily. Why? The fixer hesitated. Because someone convinced her it was safer than staying with you. The line went silent. Daeho thought about the photograph on his desk. The woman's face cut away. The boy was watching her fold paper. She hadn't abandoned him. She'd made a choice. And someone had given her the resources to make that choice permanent. Find out who runs the cooperative, Daeho said. I don't care how long it takes. Chairman, if they've maintained operational security this long. Then they'll make a mistake eventually, Daeho interrupted. Everyone does. Find the mistake. He ended the call. The sun had fully risen. The city gleamed in morning light. Somewhere in that sprawl, the woman who'd folded paper cranes on a heated floor was living a life someone else had paid for. And the boy who should have been dead was attending school under a name that didn't belong to him. Protected. Hidden. Waiting. For what, Daeho didn't yet know. But he was beginning to understand that the grave in Payu hadn't been a mistake. It had been a message. Every autumn, Seoul hosts the Children's Lantern Festival along Cheonggyecheon Stream. Families crowded the stone walkways. Paper lanterns floated on the water, wishes written in careful handwriting, set adrift to dissolve before morning. Politicians attended for photo opportunities. Corporations sponsored sections of the route. Local news crews interviewed parents about what their children had wished for. Daeho attended every year. Not for publicity. Not for networking. Because 3 years ago, the boy's name had been written on a lantern. Kang Min-jae. May he rest peacefully. The woman from Victim Services had suggested it. A way to process grief, she'd said. To find closure. Daeho had signed the consent form without reading it. The lantern had floated away with 100 others. He'd watched until it dissolved. Now he stood at the same spot. Same section of the stream. Different crowd. His security team maintained a perimeter. Polite. Invisible unless needed. Lanterns drifted past. Children ran along the walkway with glow sticks. Vendors sold roasted chestnuts and fish-shaped pastries filled with red bean paste. Normal. Annual. Expected. Then he saw the windmill. Blue plastic. 4 uneven blades. Held by a boy standing on the opposite side of the stream. The boy wore a dark jacket. Hood pulled up. Backpack hanging from one shoulder. He didn't wave. Didn't move. Just stood there. Windmill turning slowly in his hand. Daeho's chest tightened. The crowd flowed around the boy like water around a stone. No one noticed him. No one looked twice. But Daeho couldn't look away. The boy raised the windmill slightly. Angled it so the blades caught the festival lights. Blue plastic is glowing. Spinning. Then he lowered it. Daeho's hand found the edge of the stone railing. His security chief appeared at his elbow. Chairman. Are you? Do you see the boy? Daeho interrupted. The security chief scanned the crowd. Which boy, Chairman? Across the stream. Dark jacket. Holding a windmill. The chief looked. Frowned. Pulled out a radio. Team 2, visual confirmation. Target is a miner, East Bank, approximately 40 meters from the chairman's position. Static. Then, no visual, Chief. The East Bank is clear except for standard foot traffic. The chief looked again. Chairman, I don't see anyone matching that description. Daeho's grip tightened on the railing. The boy was still there. Standing perfectly still. Watching. Then a family moved between them. Parents and two children carrying lanterns. They passed in front of the boy. When they cleared, the spot was empty. Daeho pushed away from the railing. Get me across the stream, he said. His team moved immediately. Created a path through the crowd. Daeho crossed the pedestrian bridge without waiting for clearance. He reached the spot where the boy had stood. Nothing. No discarded wrapper. No footprints. No sign anyone had been there at all. Just the festival continuing around him. The chief spoke into his radio. Full sweep. All teams. Look for a miner in a dark jacket. Daeho turned slowly. Scanned faces. Postures. Movement patterns. The boy had vanished. But on the ground, pressed into a crack between paving stones, a single blue plastic blade. Broken off from a paper windmill. Daeho knelt. Picked it up. The plastic was warm. Recently touched. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered without speaking. A child's voice. Clear. Calm. You said you'd come back. Silence. Then the line went dead. Daeho stood there, holding a broken piece of plastic, surrounded by families celebrating childhood and innocence. And for the first time in 30 years, he understood what it meant to be afraid of something that shouldn't exist. Daeho returned to the penthouse at midnight. His security team swept the building. Found nothing. Reported nothing. He dismissed them. The city sprawled below. 10 million people are sleeping. Working. Living inside routines that made sense. His phone sat on the desk. The call log showed the incoming number. Unknown. Untraceable. The kind of anonymity that requires either expensive technology or institutional access. He played the recording his team had captured. The child's voice again. 6 words. You said you'd come back. Not a threat. Not a demand. Just a statement. Daeho replayed it 14 times. The voice was calm. No tremor. No anger. The kind of composure that came from rehearsal or from something deeper. Certainty. He set the phone down. Poured water. Didn't drink it. At 2 a.m, his private line rang. The fixer. Chairman, we have a development. Daeho waited. Internal audit flagged unusual activity. 3 members of your security detail requested access to archived personnel files. Specifically, files related to former household staff from 6 years ago. On whose authority? Their own. They claimed routine background verification for new hires. But there are no new hires scheduled. Daeho's jaw tightened. Names, he said. The fixer read them. 3 men. Mid-level. Competent but unremarkable. The kind who followed orders and collected paychecks without asking questions. Where are they now? Off duty. They left the building 40 minutes ago. Together. Daeho stood. Track them. Don't intercept. I want to know where they go. Yes, Chairman. The call ended. Daeho returned to the window. Betrayal was expected in his world. Manageable. Part of the cost of doing business. But this wasn't betrayal. This was something coordinated. Someone inside his organization had been watching. Waiting. Gathering information. And now they were moving. His phone buzzed again. A text. No sender ID. A photograph. The image showed a conference room. Dae-ho recognized it. The third floor of a building he owned in Gangnam. The room was used for meetings that didn't appear on official schedules. 5 men sat around the table. 2 he recognized. Senior members of the organization. Men who controlled shipping routes and construction permits. 3 he didn't. Younger. Sharper. The kind who carried themselves like they'd been military once. The photograph had been taken from outside the window. High angle. Probably a drone. Professional. Deliberate. Below the image, a single line of text. They're deciding what the boy is worth. Dae-ho's hand tightened on the phone. He forwarded the image to his fixer. Typed one word. Identify. The response came within minutes. The 2 he recognized had convened an emergency session. No record of it in official logs. No security detail. No digital trail. The 3 unknowns were traced to a private military contractor based in Gimpo. Specialists in asset recovery and risk elimination. Mercenaries. Dae-ho dialed the fixer. Stop them, he said. Chairman, if we move now. I don't care. Stop them. These are senior members. If we act without evidence. They're planning to kill a child, Dae-ho said. That's all the evidence I need. Silence on the line. Understood, Chairman. Dae-ho ended the call. He stood at the window and watched the city lights blur into streaks. For 30 years, he'd built systems designed to protect power. Now those systems had turned inward. Someone had weaponized his own organization. And the target was a boy who shouldn't exist. His phone buzzed one more time. Another text. Same unknown number. No image. Just 7 words. They won't reach him. Neither will you. Dae-ho stared at the message. Not a threat. A fact. Whoever had hidden the boy for 6 years wasn't going to let him be found now. Not by enemies. Not by the man who'd signed his death certificate. Dae-ho looked at the photograph on his desk. The woman with no face. The boy was watching her hands. The promise was written on the back. He picked up his phone and typed a response to the unknown number. Then let me try. He hit send. No reply came. But somewhere in Seoul, in an apartment he couldn't find, on a street he'd never walked, a woman read the message on a phone that had been silent for 3 years. She showed it to the boy. He read it without expression. Then returned to his homework. Not yet, she said quietly. The boy nodded. And the city continued around them, unaware that a war was beginning over a child who'd been erased from every record except memory. The warehouse sat near Incheon port. Abandoned. Officially. Used occasionally. Unofficially. The kind of space that appeared on no inventory but served 100 purposes for people who needed things done without documentation. The woman arrived first. No car. No taxi trail. She'd taken 3 buses and walked the final 2 kilometers. The boy walked beside her. Backpack on. Windmill tucked into the side pocket. They entered through a side door that should have been locked. It wasn't. Inside, the space opened into shadows and concrete. Shipping containers stacked along the walls. Plastic sheeting covered equipment that hadn't moved in years. The woman walked to the center. Stopped. The boy climbed onto a wooden crate. Sat down. Pulled out the windmill. Spun it once. They'll come, the woman said. The boy nodded. They always do. Outside, engines approached. The woman checked her watch. Right on schedule. 3 vehicles. Black sedans. Windows tinted. They parked in formation, blocking the main entrance. Doors opened. 8 men emerged. 5 wore suits. 3 wore tactical gear. The ones in suits were from Daeho's organization. The ones in tactical gear were the contractors. They entered the warehouse together. Spread out. Covered angles. Moved like people who'd done this before. The lead contractor raised a hand. The group stopped. Ahead, in the center of the space, a woman stood alone. Beside her, a boy sat on a crate. Spinning a paper windmill. No weapons. No backup. No defensive position. The contractor frowned. "Ma'am," he called out. "We're here to retrieve the child. Come with us voluntarily, and no one gets hurt." The woman didn't move. The boy stopped spinning the windmill. "You were paid to eliminate a problem," the woman said. "Do not retrieve it." The contractor hesitated. One of the men in suits stepped forward. Senior rank. Daeho's organization. "The situation has changed," he said. "The child is leverage now. Eliminating him creates more problems than it solves. Then why bring them?" The woman gestured to the contractors. "Insurance," the suit said. "In case you don't cooperate." The boy climbed down from the crate. Walked forward. Stopped 3 meters from the group. He looked up at the contractor. Then at the men in suits. "You came because someone told you I'm a threat," the boy said. His voice was calm. Adult cadence in a child's pitch. "You came because you think I'm leverage against my father." He turned the windmill once. "You're wrong about both." The contractor glanced at the suits. The senior man stepped closer. "Son, we're not here to hurt you. We're here to protect you." The boy smiled. Not warmly. Not childishly. The kind of smile that came from knowing something no one else did. "You're here because I wanted you here," he said. The warehouse lights cut out. Darkness. Shouting. Flashlights clicking on. Tactical formations are tightening. When the lights returned 3 seconds later, the boy was gone. The woman remained. Standing in the same spot. Hands visible. No weapon. "Where is he?" the contractor demanded. The woman pointed up. The boy sat on top of a shipping container. 4 meters high. Too far to have climbed in 3 seconds. Unless he'd been up there before the lights went out. Unless everything had been staged. "How many cameras are recording this?" the senior suit asked quietly. 7, the boy said. "Live feed. 3 different servers. If anything happens to my mother, the footage uploads automatically." "To where?" "Prosecutors. Media. Your competitors." The contractor lowered his weapon. The men in suits looked at each other. "You're 6 years old," one of them said. "I'm 6 years old, and I've been dead for 3 years, the boy replied. "Which means I don't exist. Which means I can show up anywhere. Say anything. Testify in any court." He stood up on the container. "Balanced perfectly. Or I can stay invisible. Keep being dead. Never become a problem." "In exchange for what?" the senior suit asked. The boy pulled out the windmill. Held it up. "One promise," he said. Kept. The warehouse went silent. Outside, more engines approached. Different sound. Heavier. Police vehicles. The contractor swore. "We're leaving," he said to his team. "Wait," one of the suits started. "We don't work for you anymore," the contractor said. This was a setup. "We're not getting caught on camera committing felonies for a child who's smarter than all of us." They moved toward the exit. Found it blocked. Not by the police. By Daeho. He stood in the doorway. Alone. No security. No weapon. Just a man who'd driven to Incheon at 3 in the morning because someone had sent him an address. He looked at the contractors. The suits. Then at the woman. Then at the boy on the shipping container. The boy held the windmill steady. Father and son. 3 years of death between them. 6 years of silence before that. And one promise that had never stopped waiting. Dae-ho took one step forward. You said I'd come back, he said quietly. The boy didn't move. You did, he replied. Before you sleep. I haven't slept well in 3 years. Dae-ho stopped. The woman watched without speaking. The men in suits began calculating exit strategies. The contractors were already gone. What do you want? Dae-ho asked. The boy climbed down from the container. Slowly. Carefully. Reached the ground. Walked forward until he stood directly in front of his father. He held out the windmill. For you to decide, the boy said. If keeping a promise is worth more than keeping an empire. Dae-ho looked down at the cheap plastic toy. 4 uneven blades. Faded blue. Made by a man who no longer existed. Given to a boy who'd been erased from every record except this one moment. He reached out. Took the windmill. And for the first time in 6 years, Kang Dae-ho knelt. Not in a cemetery. Not at a grave. In a warehouse that smelled like rust and ocean salt, in front of a son who'd learned to survive by dying. I'm here, Dae-ho said. The boy looked at him. Didn't cry. Didn't hug him. Didn't forgive him. Just looked. Are you staying? He asked. The question hung in the warehouse air. Outside, police sirens grew closer. Inside, a woman who'd given up everything waited for an answer she'd stopped expecting years ago. And a boy who'd weaponized his own death stood perfectly still, holding the only thing his father had ever made him. Asking the only question that had ever mattered. Are you staying?